Hey everybody, this video is called Another One Bites the Dust, and today we're going to continue our pass-through study here in the book of Joshua chapter 11, where we're going to look at the defeat of the Northern Canaanite Armies against Israel. And obviously they did get the memo that Israel was tougher than the South, but as stubborn as men are, sometimes we make choices that are stupid, and this is what the Northern Canaanites are going to do. But they didn't just make a choice that's stupid here. There was something else that was part of it that we're going to cover today. So let's look at Joshua chapter 11, starting with verse 1 through 5 at the defeat of the Northern Canaanite kings. And you might be wondering about the song title that's being used from Queen. You can like them, hate them, whatever the case might be, but as I go through the book of Joshua, it's kind of hard not to get that song stuck in my head when I see these people dropping like flies because they're going up against God's people. So Joshua chapter 11, verse 1 through 5, it says, "And it came to pass when Jabin, king of Hazor, heard these things, that he sent to Jobab, king of Madon, to the king of Shimron, to the king of Akshaph, to the kings who were from the north in the mountains, in the plain south of Chinneroth, in the lowland, and in the heights of Dor on the west, to the Canaanites in the east and in the west, the Amorite, the Hittite, the Perizzite, the Jebusite in the mountains, and the Hivite below Hermon in the land of Mizpah. So they went out, they and all their armies with them, as many people as the sand that is on the seashore, in multitude, with many horses and chariots. And when all these kings had met together, they came and camped together at the waters of Merom to fight against Israel." So verses 1 to 5 is a lot to take in at once because it's kind of like sitting in geography class right here. But I'm going to break it down a little bit further with some commentary here. Hazor was a city that was 5 miles southwest of Lake Hula, and it was about 10 miles north of the Sea of Galilee. And so we see King Jabin here. He leads a coalition of kings from several city-states in the northern region of Canaan and Galilee, and also to the west against Joshua. And at this point, they're not doing this blinded. They heard about the reports of what happened to the south when the south messed with Israel. But, being stubborn as mankind can be, they kind of make some poor life decisions. And so the south in the lowland, it refers to the deep rift of the Jordan Valley to the south of the lake of Chinneroth. And the lake of Chinneroth became later known better as the Sea of Galilee. And Chinneroth was probably right outside a town not far north of the lake. And the lowland or foothills are on an area somewhat southwest of the Jordan, or west of the Jordan, toward the Mediterranean Sea. And then also we see the plain of Sharon and the heights of Dor and the foothills that extend from Mount Carmel nearer the Mediterranean coast. And Dor, it was a seaport city outside the Mediterranean. So the northern kings, they heard of the South's defeat against Israel, so they got a little bit smarter and crafty in their goals. They reached out and they built their armies bigger, like China, kind of in that type of world, with a large military population, but they also invested in their weapons and logistics. They added into weapons and horses and all that we see here. But verse 6 here, it doesn't matter what man's efforts happen, because verse 6 says, "But the Lord said to Joshua, do not be afraid because of them, for tomorrow about this time I will deliver all of them slain before Israel. You shall hamstring their horses and burn their chariots with fire." So verse 6 here, we see the cut of a large sinew or a ligament at the back of the hock on the rear leg, and it would cripple the horses and making them useless. And once again, as I've mentioned many times and probably will continue going forward in the book of Joshua, you're going to see that the Lord encourages Joshua to not be afraid, that don't let circumstances affect, having faith in me. So Joshua was encouraged again to fear not. And Joshua was to realize that no matter what comes up against them, that if God is with them, the majority is with them, and God is going to get his way. In verse 7 through 9 here, it says, So Joshua and all the people of war with him came against them suddenly by the waters of Merom, and they attacked them. And the Lord delivered them into the hand of Israel, who defeated them and chased them to Greater Sidon, to the brook of Misrephoth, into the valley of Mizpah. Eastward they attacked them until they left none of them remaining. So Joshua did to them as the Lord had told him. He hamstrung their horses and burned their chariots with fire. So we see a little bit of a graphic going on here, but a couple things to pick up out of these verses about Joshua is he fought with boldness and strategy, and he surprised them with a unannounced or unexpected ambush. And Joshua did so as he fought in obedience to what the Lord has commanded him. And he destroyed even the enemy's weapons, and instead of taking the weapons like other ancient time militaries would have done, if they took out their enemy, they took their weapons and used their weapons further against their enemy. But they destroy the weapons because the Canaanites were a wicked people. In verse 10 through 15 it says, So Joshua turned back at that time and took Hazor and struck its king with the sword, for Hazor was formerly the head of all those kingdoms, and they struck all the people who were in it with the edge of the sword, utterly destroying them. There was none left breathing. Then he burned Hazor with fire. So all the cities of those kings and all their kings Joshua took and struck with the edge of the sword. He utterly destroyed them, as Moses the servant of the Lord had commanded. But as for the cities that stood on their mounts, Israel burned none of them, except Hazor only, which Joshua burned. And all the spoil of these cities and the livestock the children of Israel took as booty for themselves, but they struck every man with the edge of the sword until they had destroyed them, and they left none breathing. As the Lord had commanded Moses his servant, so Moses commanded Joshua, and so Joshua did. He left nothing undone of all that the Lord had commanded Moses. So we see a little bit of graphic here, and that's okay, because we already know in the Old Testament that God has called for judgment against the Canaanites. But this is a summary of Joshua's northern campaign against them. So we see the completeness of destruction. It goes on to show the completeness of the judgment that God has called against them. We also can notice Israel's obedience to what God has commanded them. And we see, not necessary right now, but we know prior that the Canaanites were a totally depraved people. And so verse 16 through 20, it says here, Thus Joshua took all the land, the mountains country, and all the south, all the land of Goshen, the lowland and the Jordan plain, the mountains of Israel and its lowlands, from Mount Halak in the ascent to Seir, even as far as Baal-Gad in the valley of Lebanon, below Mount Hermon. He captured all their kings and struck them down and killed them. Joshua made war a long time with all those kings. There was not a city that made peace with the children of Israel, except the Hivites, the inhabitants of Gibeon. All the others they took in battle. For it was the Lord to harden their hearts, that they should come against Israel in battle, that he might utterly destroy them, and that they might receive no mercy, but that he might destroy them as the Lord had commanded Moses. So the sweeping conquest covered much of Palestine, and the conquest, it took approximately a very popular number you see in the Bible, 7 years, and only Gibeon submitted without a fight here. And God turned the Canaanite hearts to fight in order that Israel may be the judge and instrument of God against them. And they were willfully guilty of rejecting the true God of Israel, as they were in their great wickedness. And they were as unfit to remain in the land as vomit spewed out of the mouth, just as Moses put it back in Leviticus chapter 18, verse 24. and 25. So for people that like, nice and cozy words, Moses was not very cozy when he spoke about the Canaanites. But to continue here, verse 21-22 says, "And at that time Joshua came and cut off the Anakim, and from the mountains of Hebron from Debir, from Anab, and all the mountains of Judah, and from the mountains of Israel. Joshua utterly destroyed them with their cities, and none of the Anakim were left in the land of the children of Israel. They remained only in Gaza, in Gath, and in Ashdod." So, verse 21-22, the Anakim were nothing new to you. If you've been through the Old Testament, we see them all the way back in Genesis. But they were the enemies who they dwelt in the southern area which Joshua had defeated. And they descended from the tribe of Anak, and they were related to the giants who made Israel's spies feel small as grasshoppers by comparison, back in the book of Numbers chapter 13 verse 28-33. And coming up in chapter 14 of Joshua, their territory is given to Caleb as a reward for his loyalty. And some of them, they remain in Philistine territory, most notably those who preceded Goliath. And many people know about Goliath because David and Goliath's story is a very popular passage that comes up in the book of Samuel's. And so the enemies here of 40 years, they take the fall. And remember that Israel refused to enter Canaan out of fear of the Anakim back in the book of Numbers. And we know from the book of Numbers that they were afraid to do what God told them because of the size of the Anakim, and therefore they come up with baloney that caused Israel to go through the 40 years of the wilderness. And so God gives victory at this point when they put their full trust in God to lead the battle against these people. And so verse 23 is the wrap-up verse for the chapter. It says, "So Joshua took the whole land, according to all that the Lord had said to Moses, and Joshua gave it as an inheritance to Israel, according to their divisions by their tribes. Then the land rested from war." So verse 23 is the key verse of the chapter, and many times you find that the last verse makes up everything for the chapter. But the major battles that were fought and supremacy demonstrated, even if further incidents go on to occur after this. And not every last pocket or potential resistance had been rooted out yet. Israel isn't going to live their best lives after the fact at this point. There's still going to be many trials and tribulations and battles and everything else going forward from here. But to wrap up here, we look at the defeat of the northern kingdom of Canaan after they gathered against Israel. And once again, as I keep on saying through the book of Joshua, God encourages Joshua to not look at current circumstances, but to trust him and to fear not, do not be afraid. So he encourages Joshua as God is revealing that the battle is mine. And we see that Joshua attacks the northern armies by an unexpected ambush, and they were defeated. And we saw that he did so in obedience. He didn't do it in cowardice or any of that. He did it in obedience. He did it in boldness. He did it in strategy. He had compassion, but he also was committed to doing what the Lord has called him to do. And we saw the defeat of Hazor, the head of the northern Canaanite kingdoms. And so Joshua, he got the complete victory over Canaan, over the north and the south. And we see that he got victory over them because God hardened their hearts to bring judgment against them. And today, I believe God still hardened the hearts. And we're going to go over to the book of Romans chapter 1. And what better time is there to look at Romans chapter 1, looking at God giving man over to themselves with hardened hearts to do the corrupt things that they want to do, rather than it being the month of pride. So Romans chapter 1 verse 24-28, as we come in for a landing, says, therefore God also gave them up to uncleanness and the lust of their hearts, to dishonor their bodies among themselves, who exchanged the truth of God for the lie, and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. For this reason God gave them up to vile passions, for even their women exchanged the natural use for what it is against nature. Likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust for one another, men with men, committing what is shameful, and receiving in themselves the penalty of their error, which is due. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to the debased mind, to do those things which are not fitting. And they were being filled with all unrighteousness, with sexual immorality, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, evil-mindedness. They are whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, violent, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, undiscerning, untrustworthy, unloving, unforgiving, unmerciful, who knowing the righteous judgment of God, that those who practice such things are deserving of death, not only to do the same, but also to approve of those who practice them. In Romans chapter 1, it's kind of like reading the modern day newspaper, and to go beyond just Pride Month and the wickedness of God turning people over, letting them do their own things. We see the other list of sins here. And the other big thing that's been happening is these mass shooters, mass killers going into public places with guns, whatever. And even if it's a setup by the government to push a political agenda, it's still all wickedness. And so when God hardens the heart, he gives man up to the sin that is in his heart. And that's why we have the reprobate society that's out there glorifying homosexuality, corrupted sexuality, gender confusion, all that around us this month. But remember that that's not our only issues that are all around us. When you go through these lists of sins, we see murder and evil-mindedness and backbiters, haters of God, the wicked, the proud, the violent, boasters, people disobedient to parents, so on and so forth in these lists of verses. And we see that society overall takes pride in these sins. And so God's judgment will come against any sort of pride of sin. And grace either hardens the heart or it softens it to respond to God. And we saw that the Anakim, they were defeated as well. And then we saw the complete victory. And we saw that finally a time of rest and peace came about at the end of chapter 11. But that's going to wrap up this video for today. And next we'll be looking at the list of the conquered kings tomorrow. It's going to be a very short video because you're going to see it's just a list of names, and many times when you go through a list of names for a chapter, you just skip over them. But there's one point out of all the names I want to make. So I'm going to do a quick video on that chapter tomorrow. So I hope you have a great weekend coming up. God bless, and we'll talk to you later.